In this video, we will continue our exploration of common plants found in a deciduous forest. We are still walking along Witch Hazel Trail, but we are switching to some of the more advanced groups. That will include our gymnosperms. So we're going to start with the video background and then we'll add a little more detail.
So what we are seeing here is a spruce tree. A spruce tree is an example of a coniferous tree, which means that it has needles. When we're trying to figure out the identity of coniferous trees, we look at the size of the needles and how they're attached to the twigs. So if we look at these ones, you can see that they're attached singly. This one is by itself, this one is by itself, instead of in groups. If we back up, we can get a sense of the overall shape of the tree, and sometimes that is a helpful characteristic. And then another thing that can be helpful is to look at the bark. So we can see, looking at this young spruce over here, that it has flaky bark with kind of a salmony orange background. And if you were to scrape at it a little bit, you can see that kind of pink salmon color. That's a characteristic.
Okay, so the first takeaway from this video in terms of description is the flaky bark with the salmon or orangey colored background. Let's take a close-up look at those on the next slide. So here's a shot of the overall tree. Notice that the tree has a single straight trunk. Okay, the lower branches tend to die and fall off. These are good characteristics, and these are the types of characteristics that will allow you to distinguish from lookalikes. For example, white spruce and black spruce have a lot in common, but that's one of the things that would let you separate them out. The branches slope just a little bit. So if we follow this over, there's just a little bit of a dip or a curve. That's yet another characteristic. Let's take a close-up look at the needles. So when we look at the needles, again, as the video said, we're seeing how there's a single point of attachment for each needle. The needles are approximately 3/4 of an inch long. Needle length is another big deal. These particular needles are fairly stiff and they have pointed tips. And if you were to look at one in cross section, like pluck it off and cut through it, it would be kind of a square. Pine needles in general have circular, triangular, or squarish cross sections. White spruce also has pine needles that if you crush some in your hands, it actually smells pretty good. All right, let's continue on. So white spruce is in the gymnosperm group. Gymnosperm is the third of 4 plant groups. Sometimes we call things in the gymnosperm group pine trees, conifers, evergreens. They don't lose their needles. They hold on to them year round. The word gymnosperm actually means naked seed. So the big indicator in this group is that their reproductive structure is called a cone or pine cone. And they have a seed embedded at the base of every single one of these scales. So they're out and exposed to the world, unlike our last group where the seeds are tucked inside the plant structures. So cones are another great characteristic to pay attention to. Cones of the white spruce tree are typically 1 to 2.5 inches long. They can be by themselves, single cones, single cones, or in a cluster. The one we're seeing here is a single cone, and they typically hang down off the branches as opposed to like pointing up into the air. So that's all great information. If you want, stop the video and read through the page. A lot of what I said is already on this page, but sometimes that's useful. I love these little field guides. They're awesome for carrying out. They fit in your back pocket, small size. So, all right, let's move on to our last group, which is the angiosperm group. So we're going to start with the witch hazel. And I want to point out the picture over here on the first. The witch hazel is these skinny little trees here, and we have this very low canopy that we can see. So if you look up, it's pretty close to over the top of your head. All right, a little bit more in the video.
This is Witch Hazel Trail, and we are going to proceed left off of the Eagle Scout Bridge. All right, this is a witch hazel baby tree. Witch hazel leaves have 2 distinctive characteristics. If we zoom in on the edge is undulate, or it curves slightly. And the base of the leaf, if we zoom in, we will see that the base of the leaf is very asymmetrical. This side extends further, this side is shorter. Now I'm going to back away from that. So we're seeing a typical woodland forest view. We've got a mix of maple and oak and beech. But what I want to come over here is the tree that this trail is named for, which is the witch hazel. So the witch hazel is the one directly in front of us with the skinny tree trunks. And so if we zoom in, they often will grow in a clump like this, 2, 3, 4. They don't get super tall, so if I back up, we can see that this is maybe only 10 or 15 feet tall. The branches often fork in this typical Y pattern that we can see, and that's actually where part of how it got its name, which referred to the fact that this tree was believed to have magical powers, in the sense of we would use it for tuning forks, those Y-shaped forks, to divine or locate where water was located.
And I'm going to replay the last few seconds of the video because I managed to capture, without realizing it, a pileated woodpecker drumming in the background, and that is going to be one of our animal species. So let's see, let's back it up like 10 seconds here.
We would use it for tuning forks,
for
those Y-shaped forks, to divine or locate where water was located.
Hear that? That's a pileated. Okay, let's capture a little bit of that on our next slide. So here's some stationary pictures, a little less blurry to look at. I'm going to start off with the leaf traits. So these are both fall pictures, so the leaves are starting to change color already. So our leaf has kind of an oval shape to it, and when we look at the edges, that's always this is called the margin of the leaf, and we always want to pay attention to whether it's smooth or pointed or curvy. So this has kind of a slightly wavy margin. The apex, and this one doesn't show it great, some of the other pictures showed a little bit better, but there's a little bit of a point to this tip if it was aimed better. This one shows the asymmetrical base really well. Look at where this part of the leaf attaches to the petiole, and then you come down here and this part of the leaf is dropped a little bit. That's asymmetry. They don't both attach at the same spot. That's a easy characteristic for witch hazel trees. In terms of the trunks, here's an even better example than the one in the video. Look at all of these thin, crooked branching ones. You can see that Y shape here, and there's another Y right there. So very easy to spot on our trails, even in the middle of the winter when there are no leaves around. I wanted to point out that the angiosperm group has the advanced characteristics of having both flowers and fruits, and this is a really cool specimen because the flowers come about late fall. They're actually out in October. Okay, and these are the flowers. They have 4 long yellow twisted petals. So we actually have multiple flowers happening in this picture. Often they're in clusters of 3. So 1, 2, 3. So the fruits don't actually, so the flowers happen in the fall, and then the tree goes through the winter, and then the next summer or fall, the flower turns into the fruit, and nuts are a type of fruit. So the this looks like probably last year's because it's pretty fresh in color. It doesn't look dark or dried out. And then these will actually stay on the tree for a couple of years, even after they've dropped their seeds. So a fun fact about witch hazel is, besides the fact that they used to make the divining rods out of it to search for water, is that you can crush the leaves, the twigs, and the bark, and you can make an astringent, okay, which you use in medicinal washes. Astringents dry things out. So if you put it on your face, it can kind of get rid of some of the oil. And in the cases of minor bleeding, it can actually kind of stop the bleeding from occurring. So that's pretty cool. All right, our last species is the partridge berry. And for the partridge berry, you're going to turn your attention not looking up to the trees, but down to the ground. Partridge berry is a small perennial, so it grows from year to year. And typically what you're going to see, this is a very typical presentation, it kind of creeps along the ground. It has small green leaves. These are like the size of, I would say, a dime, give or take. And they always have this very pale midrib. That's a great giveaway, okay, pale midrib. These are present year-round on our trails. You can even dig through the snow and find these green leaves still existing in a Michigan winter. This, I've dug the leaf litter out a little bit so you can see a little bit more detail, and what that shows you is that those small oval leaves are often paired, so there's always two coming off the same point on the stem. We call that opposite attachment. When you're learning a lot about identifying plants, you pay attention to whether the leaves attach alternately or oppositely. This is opposite, where they're both coming off of the same spot on the stem. And fun fact about this one, the scientific name Mitchella repens. Mitchell was a friend of Linnaeus. Linnaeus was the guy that figured out how to do the scientific naming process, so he named this after his friend. And repens means to trail or creep, and that's a reference to the fact that this kind of grows along the ground. Okay, so if we look at these pictures, we can see both the flower right here. Okay, so you always get typically paired flowers. So there's two leaves, there's two flowers. They have 4 white petals most often. They're very hairy. Look at the fuzziness of this surface. Typically you would be looking for these in June for the flowers. And then after the flower, we continue the reproductive cycle and we get the fruit. And so in this case, we have a red berry. And the red berry has 2 dimples. So you can see one right here. And I think you can see the other one right here. It's a little bit hard to spot, but that's an easy characteristic because there are more than one type of red berry in the woods. These ones are down on the ground, but they have the double dimple. These berries are edible, but they're basically tasteless, so they're not going to be very good to consume. But anything that has a flower and a fruit is going to be a member of our angiosperm group. So that concludes the plants. From here, you're going to watch additional videos about fungal species and animal species. Enjoy.